And I think my experience in Chile, was the hardest year of my entire life. I definitely saw things that were traumatic. I think for me, the most difficult thing was interviewing mothers of the desaparecidos, these political prisoners who had been disappeared in the middle of the night. And they were, kids that were even younger than me. They were 17, 16 years old, who had been taken, tortured to death. And the story of Chile is very complex. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that there's a single story about that country, but for me, I think that was the importance of Chile. That was the year, that was the moment when I finally stepped into my story.
From the Grit Institute, this is the Grit Factor podcast, and I'm Shannon Huffman-Polson, former Apache helicopter pilot, speaker, and author of The Grit Factor: Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. I'm also the founder of the Grit Institute, where I help purpose-driven leaders like you build grit and resilience and connect with purpose so that you can navigate transitions, overcome challenges, and lead with impact in your work for a better world. Today, we are honored to host Ross Wehner, a visionary in global education and leadership development. Ross is the founder of the World Leadership School, an organization dedicated to partnering with K-12 schools to reimagine learning and cultivate next-generation leaders. Through immersive travel experiences and educator workshops, the school empowers students and teachers to explore purpose-driven education. In addition to his work with the World Leadership School, Ross co-founded Teach United, a nonprofit focused on enhancing educational outcomes in underserved communities worldwide. By providing training and resources to educators, Teach United aims to bridge educational disparities and unlock student potential. Before his ventures in education, Ross built a diverse career as a journalist, wilderness instructor, and mountain guide. His journalism work in Latin America during the 1990s covered critical issues such as climate change and human rights, experiences that eventually led him to shift from reporting problems to seeking solutions through education. Ross is also an accomplished author, having co-authored the guidebook Moon Peru, reflecting his deep connection to Latin America and his commitment to cultural exploration. In this episode, we'll explore Ross's journey from journalism to education, his insights on purpose-driven learning, and his dedication to transforming educational landscapes. His multifaceted experiences offer valuable perspectives for anybody on leadership, innovation, and the pursuit of meaningful change. Let's take off. Welcome, Ross. It's great to have you here on the Grit Factor podcast, where we're talking about what it means to be purpose-built in season 3. How are you?
I'm doing great.
You have had a remarkable career, really unusual and unique experiences that have led you to where you are today. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Have you introduce us, maybe bring us into your work down in South America for a little bit and talk us through how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, life is very easy to see in the rearview mirror, and it's harder to see as you're living it moving forward. And
Yes.
you had asked me about my time in Chile, and that's an interesting story because it really was the beginning of my engagement with purpose. I grew up in a upper middle class family in Northern Virginia. I went to a large public high school, was a strong student, went to the University of Virginia. I'd been an editor at a newspaper at university, and when I came home after college, I got a job at a local newspaper. It was a full-time job. I was able to. I had a brand new car. Life was perfect. And one day, I woke up and I had sort of the beginnings of what I now see was a kind of a nervous breakdown. I had this sense that my life was actually elsewhere. I had this sense that I was not living the life that I was supposed to, that I was maybe playing by someone else's rules.
Mm.
And so I kind of went through this difficult period, and I ended up going to my parents and saying, "Mom and Dad, I have decided to quit my job, and I am going to move to Chile, where I want to write about the Pinochet government." And the Pinochet
Mhm.
government, of course, was a military regime in the late '80s, was nearing its end, um, and huge human rights abuses that were well publicized at the time.
Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship was one of the most terrifying and violent periods of Chilean history. Thousands of citizens were murdered, were tortured. This was the period when that ominous word, the disappeared, emerged.
Chile was seen as an island of democracy in Latin America until the Pinochet regime.
My father looked at me, he said, "Ross, you are making a huge mistake. If you stay the course at your newspaper where you're working, you will work at the Washington Post in 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
Um, you're basically throwing away everything you've accomplished." And I heard his advice, but I realized, or I felt, that what I was sensing and intuiting was inevitable. And
Mm.
so I asked my parents for money. They said, absolutely not. And I got a job as a waiter at a restaurant in addition to my day job. And I eventually bought a ticket to Chile, and I went down there with I think I was about a couple $100s in my pocket. And
So let me interrupt you for a sec. How did you where did the idea of Chile come from? I mean, obviously there were big things happening there, but there are big things happening in many places in the world. So how did that come
it
into
was
your
an
consciousness?
article I read in the Washington Post.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and that was the thing. And I just was it was a story of they had just gone through the plebiscite, and they had voted no,
Yeah.
to and they were calling for an election, and I was just fascinated by it. And when I went down there, I we had a connection to a family in Chile, and so I stayed with their grandmother. And
Wow.
Alicia Bruna and I, every evening, we would talk about things I had seen in the city that day. And
Wow.
um, it was very interesting, because during the day I was seeing these massive protests and buses getting flipped over. And I was in a protest actually where someone I was interviewing was actually shot as I was speaking to him.
My gosh. That has
Yeah.
to potentially negatively influence your well, either negatively influence your involvement or reinforce the necessity of your involvement.
Yeah. I don't feel like it was a traumatic event, but I do feel like I feel like people who are unusually bright, in other
Mm.
words, who emanate lightness and have a sense of deep purpose, they usually
Yes.
have experienced deep darkness and deep
Mm.
shadow. And they understand how to take shadow and darkness and suffering and convert it into lightness.
Mm.
Um, and I think my experience
Beautiful.
in Chile, was the hardest year of my entire life.
Mhm.
I definitely saw things that were traumatic. I think for
Sure.
me, the most difficult thing was interviewing mothers of the desaparecidos, these political prisoners who had been disappeared in the middle of the night. And they were, kids that were even younger than me. They were 17, 16 years
Wow.
old, who had been taken, tortured to death. And, the story of Chile is very complex. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that there's a single story about that country. But for me, I think that was the importance of Chile. That was the year. That was the moment when I finally stepped into my story, when
Mm.
I stopped playing by someone else's rules and I started following my own path.
Wow.
And that has made all the difference in my life. And that truly is when my journey towards discovering, or as I say, uncovering my purpose began.
Yes, I like that idea of both discovering and uncovering, with the idea
Yeah.
that it may be something that is innate already inside of you and potentially something that you also put together. How do you think about that?
Yes, absolutely. I completely, I mean, that you put it very beautifully. I do think that, um, purpose is as Stanford Center on Adolescence. This is the work of Bill Damon. Bill Damon says
Yes.
purpose is a stable intention.
Mm,
So it's actually stable in our life. There's something stable about us that
yes.
begins in childhood
Mhm.
and carries through our life. Although our careers, our passions, our chapters may look very different, there's something stable about it, right? And it's
Yeah.
about meaning and identity on the inside
Yeah.
that connects with action or impact on the outside. So the definition from
Yes.
Stanford is purpose is a stable intention that is meaningful to self and beneficial or consequential to the world. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah,
Wonderful. And I like that idea that it is something that is internal to you, that it is part of you, but you will have to maybe build, maybe discover, maybe not manipulate, because that has other connotations, but maybe uncover in different parts of your life in different ways. Is that right?
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right. Purpose is, on one hand, it's about following our intuition, following our gut,
sure.
making decisions that maybe perhaps no one else can understand but us. And it's also about that creative capacity we have of making a story and then stepping into the story and living it.
Yes.
Now, as a journalist, I ended up staying in Latin America for 8 years. Um, and I was in Chile. And then when democracy really came to Chile, I went to Peru, which was in the midst of all kinds of problems with terrorism and cholera and hyperinflation. And I had sort of created this story about myself of being this investigative journalist and breaking stories and then making a market around a story. And what was interesting is I took that story as far as I could take it. And at the end of my time in Peru, I was struggling with depression and darkness. And
Hmm.
um, it was just too much. The darkness of what I was seeing and writing about was just really too much for me. And so I
Yes.
decided to come home, and I was broken in some ways. And I decided to come home and I began teaching. Um, and, I worked as a teacher with kids who were, I would say, had severe behavioral issues, and in many cases, different types of learning differences.
Yes.
And that path, working with kids, getting a graduate degree, I later worked as a wilderness instructor for the National Outdoor Leadership School. All that led me to um, start World Leadership School, right? And looking back on it now, what I see is that um, my time as a journalist, I was using my gifts, right? My purpose is I forge paths
Yes.
so that goodness prevails.
I
Uh,
love that.
yeah,
Beautiful.
and I arrived at that purpose statement by doing a lot of work, particularly with your good friend Vicky Weeks.
Ah, yes, of course.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you, Vicky.
he is an unbelievable coach and mentor to me. So, but what I realized looking back on it now, again, life is much easier to understand in the rearview mirror that, when I was in Latin America, I was using my gifts of forging paths, right? And it
Mm,
was this gift of like seeing an idea and then building momentum around that idea, right? The problem about my work as a journalist is that I was using my gifts, but I wasn't using them to have the kind of impact that really, really, truly brings me alive. And
sure.
because my gift is not I forge paths so that we break down, inequity or something. It's like I'm
Sure.
not a warrior, I'm not a fighter, I'm not. And so the constant fighting of journalism just wore me
Mm,
out. So when I came back to be a teacher, it was really about working towards solutions.
mm,
And that is where I really stepped into my purpose, because my purpose is I forge paths so that goodness prevails. What really the impact that really makes me come alive is harmony, convergence,
mm,
having things work smoothly. And although schools don't always work smoothly, I'm working towards that in schools, and it really is. I have found a way of making a living now that feels very meaningful to me, and I don't ever want to retire. I mean, I want to work until I'm no longer able. I just
That's
love.
where we all should hope to get to, right? Is that we are our the work is our life and our life is our work. That is an amazing thing. There are so many interesting transitions here and great insight in what you've covered in a very short amount of time. So I want to get into a little bit of each
Yeah.
of those, and then also, of course, go more into World Leadership School. But first of all, the transition as a very young person, just out of college, really, and just working for a few years to understand that you were living somebody else's path or somebody else's idea, and that you weren't really living the story that you were meant to live. I think the concept of our stories is where purpose really comes from. It's really the generative piece that we have to really face and confront and understand. But most young people have a really hard time with that realization, that understanding, and then being willing to take action on it. What do you think helped you to see that and then also helped you to take that action initially?
Yeah. Well, for me, as a young person, I think my reading of philosophy, particularly Friedrich Nietzsche, really, really helped me quite a bit. I actually studied in Germany. I learned German at university specifically to read Nietzsche and other philosophers, and the wisdom, some of the wisdom. I think Nietzsche is a greatly understood, thinker, but some of the wisdom from Nietzsche really shot through me like a lightning bolt and woke me up to the aliveness, my aliveness and my energy, and how I could either make of my life, I could either follow the system or I could create my own life. And it was that radical freedom um, that woke me up. And I think Nietzsche was my main influence, to be honest.
I wish every young person, and in fact all of us, would spend more time with philosophy. I really
Mhm.
think we've lost connection with a lot of that. That's really powerful, actually. That's terrific. And then
Yeah,
when you had been in Latin America for some time, and felt that darkness and had to leave, I think that is a place that a lot of people are getting stuck, is that place where they're more integrated into what they had thought was the career that they wanted, in maybe even working in the way that they wanted, maybe even doing exactly what they wanted to do, and they come up against realizing, perhaps not as dramatically or as obviously as you did, but coming up against this idea that this isn't the right path after all. This isn't where I'm meant to be. So how did you make your way through that transition? Because that's the place I see a lot of people getting really stuck.
that was a very difficult transition. It was absolutely um, the hardest part of my life so far. And I think that um, I remember in Peru, one moment that really stood out for me is in Peru, it was just I got into a very dark space, and one day I was in the Cusco area, and I decided to go for a walk. Um, and this is before I really had my experience as a mountain guide and all these other things, but I love the mountains. And so above the town of Urubamba in the Sacred Valley, there's a glacier, the Chicon Glacier. And I had been looking at this glacier for some time. And so I decided to walk over the glacier to see what was on the other side. And I went to the market with my uh, I had a I have a padrastro, like I'm a godfather to a child in Peru.
Yeah.
A friend asked me to be the godfather, but anyway, so I went with him to my compadre, and we went to the market and bought some gas for my stove, and then I walked up there, and it was no paths. It was extremely steep. Ichu grass, which is this really long, beautiful grass, and I just climbed and climbed and climbed and thousands, 5, 6 thousand vertical feet until I got to the base of the glacier, and I was just absolutely exhausted. And I went to make my food, and the gas I had bought in the market wasn't going to work with my stove, and I should have realized that. But anyway, so I didn't have food, and I just sat there in this tall ichu grass as night came and the cold winds came off the glacier, and I just stared into the starry night, and nothing stared back at me. But I felt I felt the inkling of a new direction amidst all of my um, misery at the time, and there were some hints of wonder and magic too. I remember on that hike there was a tree that was up on a ridge above me, and there wasn't a tree for another 2,000 vertical feet. It was just like this tree that was growing. I couldn't even believe it. And so the next morning, I walked over the glacier, which is really not something you should ever do without a rope and by yourself. But
Right.
I walked over the glacier, I walked on the other side, and I met a family, a herding family. They were herding llamas and alpacas, and they invited me to stay in their stone cottage, and they gave me soup. And a couple of days later, I walked back on a path that was much easier to cross the mountains with.
Wow.
And I went to see a witch doctor in Urubamba, who's a very famous witch doctor named Gladys. And I talked with her and I told her about this tree that I had seen. And we had a really lovely conversation. And the whole experience woke me up to this idea that there is so much more to our world than we can perceive. There's
Yes.
so much more wonder and magic and energy. And our
Yeah.
potential as human beings is limitless. And, we believe that the world that we can touch and feel and see, that's all there is. And I'm here to tell you there's a lot more. And so it was the
Yeah.
combination of that starry vision and the wonder and the magic that began to bring me back to life.
Wow. That is a powerful, powerful story. What did Gladys tell you?
Gladys told me she knew the tree that I was speaking of. And she told me that tree gives life, that it's a life-giving tree. And I felt the life that it gave me. I mean, it gave me life the next morning. I mean, I had to have been exhausted with eating no food, but I woke up and walked another, I don't know, probably 10 miles over that glacier and down the other side. So I was very thin when I came back. Yeah, for sure.
Wise, but wise. That's right.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, there's something of a vision quest kind of experience in that, it sounds like.
Mhm. Yes. And
Yeah.
I do think that there's so much noise and there's so much pressure and there's so many systems around us that we're unconscious of, right? But we are, purpose is an individual journey,
Yes.
but it always happens within systems. And there are systems that are malevolent and there are systems that are friendly and supportive, but we're always surrounded by systems. And so I think seeking when you're really, truly stuck, I have always had tremendous luck in finding solitude and somewhere, going somewhere and just really being by myself and allowing all of the layers to fall off. And I think fasting definitely helps with that. I mean, I didn't intend to fast, but since that experience in Peru, I've done other times where I've gone into the mountains and fasted for up to 3 days. And
Wow.
it's always been an extraordinary experience that has helped me move along and evolve.
Wow. That is powerful, and a powerful and very specific idea for others to potentially explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important to do fasting and any kind of solo thing in the woods very safely. So
Of
for
course.
instance,
Yes, of course. Yeah, don't go running off into the woods if you've never done it before. Or
speaking to my wife, so she was like able to see exactly where I was the whole time.
perfect, excellent. That's right.
The North Cascades, where you are, is a big place. You get into a lot of trouble pretty quickly.
You can. Our 14-year-old just did his first solo overnight just last weekend, which
Okay,
was,
great.
I think, very powerful for him. He wasn't too far, and we have the inReach, but but no, I think it was an amazing experience for him, which I hope that he'll do much more of. That's amazing. So you taught for a while, And then you came up with an idea that you have now built into this World Leadership School. And it's just, again, this is a path that it seems like you didn't know this from the outset, right? This wasn't an initial goal that you had either out of college, out of journalism or anything else. It seems like this developed. So talk a little bit about how that developed and how purpose that you were discerning along the way may have helped to inform that and continues to inform that.
Yeah, so, all these global issues I saw in Latin America, I realized that no one in my home culture in the United States really understood the extent or magnitude of these issues. I was
Sure.
writing about climate change in the mid 90s because I was watching the tropical glaciers in Peru disappear. And
Wow.
in the mid 90s, there were very few people who believed in climate change. And so, for me, World Leadership School was our mission is to partner with K-12 schools to reimagine learning and create next generation leaders. So we're about using school, helping school become a platform for launching children into lives of purpose. And it
Amazing.
was motivated by this original idea of all these global issues that need solving, that need people who care and are attached to them, and people who are alive and really working, using their full humanity to solve these issues.
Yes.
And over time, that mission has evolved into an operating model. I mean, I would say World Leadership School has unfolded in a purposeful way, in the sense that we didn't really have a 10-year strategic plan. We had more of a mission that we followed in different ways. And we started off by really, first of all, just helping schools take students out into the world to experience some of these rural communities
Sure.
where there's amazing leadership happening. In Peru, and then we went to Kenya. And now we have programs in 12 countries and several locations in the United States. And in these programs, we essentially, I think of these programs as like taking students and just shaking them and
Yeah.
helping them just like wake up to the magic and the wonder of the world. And so, in our program, students will travel to, a village in Peru, and they will stay with the homestay family, and they will work alongside these nonprofit organizations, meet local leaders, see the way that these leaders are leading. We have a particular philosophy on leadership. We say that that leaders lead from their strengths, and they compensate for their weaknesses. In other words, they
Mm.
know what they're good at, and they
Sure.
find ways to compensate for those things that they're not good at. We say that leaders listen deeply and value multiple perspectives. So we
Mm.
believe that listening is a skill that is like radically atrophied in especially American society, and it's very strong in many indigenous societies. So that's a
Yes.
major learning for a lot of students. And then
Wow.
finally, we say that leaders have a story about themselves that they
Mm.
embody with their actions and their words and their thoughts, right?
Yes.
And that's purpose, right? And it's really interesting because so often we see examples of leaders that are like corporate CEOs or big politicians or whatever, and the leaders that we're looking at are very diverse, because some are educated, some are not, some are extroverted, some are very shy, some have a political position, others just have influence, right? And so the students begin to realize, in these small communities, really in the middle of nowhere, where there's very few resources, and these people are doing amazing things for themselves, they realize that leadership is just like coming alive. Essentially, leadership is
Mm.
is connecting to your gifts and then using those gifts to have an impact, and then creating a story about yourself that others can understand. And we talk about how, you know, leaders have this sort of essence, right? They're aware
Mm.
of who they are, they're aware of their story, and they achieve a very tight fit between their essence and their form. In other words,
Mm.
who they are on the inside and how they show up in the world. And
Yes.
these leaders who have a very tight fit, they are transparent, they're authentic. People just want to be with them and learn from them and work with them. And that's why they're powerful.
Sure. That is a really beautiful way to consider leadership and not one that I have heard articulated in that way at all. I really love that. And especially to be able to help young people into that concept of themselves and how it is that they have agency to be a part of positive change in the world. That it's just an incredible thing. Yeah. What is one of your favorite stories of where you've seen that in action in one of your programs or maybe after one of those programs?
Yeah, well, we haven't done a very good job tracking that, and that's something we want to do better at tracking the like longitudinal impact
Sure.
of our students. But in the early days of our programs, we would take videos of students and would have them at the end of the trip do a leadership story, which is essentially like what they learned, right?
Okay.
And I remember there was a program with a school in New Hampshire, and we took students over to Kenya. And I was looking at those videos the other day and talking to a teacher who's still at the school and who's still in touch with these students. And, it was just amazing how those students at the age of 17 were basically able to, after this experience of getting, we call it disconnect, decenter, re-envision. So we disconnect students from technology, we push them off balance, we
Right.
decenter them, and then they re-envision who they are and how they relate to the world. After this experience of disconnect, decenter, re-envision, these students were able to articulate really important insights about themselves that later manifested in their lives. And I'm thinking about one particular student who was just fascinated by medicine and by healing. And now she works at the Center for Disease Control as a really well-known and powerful scientist now in her 30s.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic.
so it was just, yeah, I mean, you really do see how those experiences create these like core insights
Right.
um, that stick with students. And it may take 10 years to yield fruit, but it's there. It's a seed that's been planted.
100%. I mean, that's what education should be about, right? Is planting those seeds and nurturing those and allowing them to blossom.
That's right. And the second part of our work that's evolved over the years is learning. So,
Sure.
we take students out into the world, but we also coach teachers to bring purpose to learning. And it's that second part of the work that I'm most involved in now. And we work with teachers to design learning through a lens of what we call thinking, feeling, and doing. So, if you think about most learning in the past was mainly about thinking, in other words, helping students develop core knowledge or, some skills like critical thinking, et cetera.
Sure.
Learning moving forward, we believe, is going to integrate thinking with feeling. So feeling is like, what are my emotions? How do I manage them? How can I see others with empathy and respect? What are my gifts? Ultimately, what's my sense of purpose, right? This is
Yes.
learning that is deeply meaningful and that like sparks emotion in children, right?
Yes.
Um, and the other part is doing. So how can I take what I know and who I am and apply it to something that matters, right?
Mhm.
Create or make something, engage with diverse communities, project-based learning, social justice work, et cetera, all this,
Sure.
civic engagement. And so learning is thinking, feeling, and doing. So we are, I'm 57, 56, and I would like to work. I've decided I want to work for another 15 years. And we are trying to embark on our biggest chapter ever at World Leadership School, which is really um, accelerating this movement towards what we call purpose learning, this idea of learning as thinking, feeling, and doing. So we're going to be launching a nonprofit consortium that will bring diverse schools together to reimagine learning together. I'm trying to write a book right now. Um,
Wonderful.
I'm trying to do a lot of things right now to sort of take our work over the last 20 years and really like bring it home in a
Yes.
way that makes a difference in the national dialogue about education, maybe even the global dialogue about education, because I really believe that deep down every single parent, their deepest desire for their child is for the child to thrive,
Yes.
right? And that's what purpose is all about. And
Wonderful.
so, this should not be a controversial concept. Schools have been designed for a lot of things in the past. I think that moving forward,
Yes.
schools are going to be designed for human thriving because it's
Mm.
the only thing that will ultimately um, produce the kind of leaders who will put our world moving in the right direction.
I love that. I love everything about that. The couple of things that, and I want to be able to explore this for about 3 more hours with you, actually, but I'm trying to think back to your initial seed and prompting to consider your own story and purpose, and how that was grounded in your exposure to philosophy, to a philosopher, to his writing, to his work, to concepts and ideas. And sometimes it feels like some programs work at the expense of some of that classical learning. Is there a way to do both hand in hand?
Absolutely. I think core knowledge is critical for
Yes.
learning. I mean, I'm not advocating that we get rid of content or critical skills at all. But we need to anchor, just like I had my experience in college reading Nietzsche was profoundly meaningful to me.
Yes.
And it led me to go out and do something with it, right? So that's thinking, feeling, and doing in action, right? And so we need to find ways to make learning. We need to really design learning from the perspectives of children,
Yeah.
not from other machinery that we've invented in the past.
Very, very well said. Well, the world and our country and our communities, both big and small, all need very much these ideas. And I'm so grateful to have them in the world. If you talked about solitude, if you were to advise somebody who is feeling that they were not anchored to their purpose, maybe they haven't even discerned their purpose, besides solitude, what would be some other recommendations?
Um, we at World Leadership School have developed a purpose clarification process that I think works really well. It's based on some work I've done in the coaching realm.
Sure.
Um, that we haven't found a way to scale this process to thousands of people yet, but it's work that I do with children and with adults. But I think that for me, I meditate every morning, and
Mm.
I think that's a great place to start. Is just
Yes.
to sit for 10 minutes. Give yourself, even if it's just 5 minutes,
Mm.
a time in the morning where you can find some peace and quiet. And if your household is crazy or you wake up after everyone else does, just put yourself in a closet and sit on a pillow and just sit. And there's so many great resources. I mean, I'm a big believer in mindfulness.
Yes. Yes. That's an excellent recommendation. A great introductory journey into the solitude
Yeah.
and the wisdom that's there. Well, thank you, Ross, so much for all that you've shared. Tell us where people can find you and find out more about World Leadership School.
Oh, yes. Well, so our website is worldleadershipschool.com. And yeah, www.worldleadershipschool.com. You can reach us there.
Perfect. I know they can find you that way too. So thank you again. If you have a moment, please make sure that you've subscribed, forward this to a friend, and drop in a review. It makes a big difference to the success of the show and helps others find it.